All right, the idea today is that we continue on from where we were. All right. So, am I right in assuming that last time everybody got everything built so that when you came in and ran the program, that it looked like that? Is that correct? Okay, good. What the author attempts to show you on this page here, this is what, page 34 of that handout, is, and maybe you've seen this before, sometimes when you get error messages like this, you get the little red dot over on the side. Sometimes if you click on that dot, it'll have a suggested fix. It's more along the lines of what you've seen in Eclipse, all right? And I always try it. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to be the wrong fix, and you're still going to get an error, you're going to get another error, but usually it's going to be what you want. Unfortunately, I think that many of us, we're used to seeing Microsoft type of errors, and when you get different kinds of errors there, they may or may not make a lot of sense to you, all right? They'll make more sense to you the more often you do this, and the more familiar you get with both the language, the IDE, etc. But for a while, if you've got a question, raise your hand. I'll try to help you. John will try to help you, etc. But for instance, in here, this one says expected semicolon separate. You'll get that one a lot. And you're like, wait a minute, you just said, you told us last time that you didn't have to put semicolons at the end of lines. That's true. The error is typically not at the end of the line. The error is typically somewhere in here where you didn't put something in that you should have put in, you spelled something wrong. It could be just about anything, all right? So what you want to do then, what's really good, if you've noticed this already, if I type in let action equals UI alert action, if I just type in that, all right, everybody with me? So I just type in let action equal UI alert action. The IntelliSense should kick in. And it shows you. I recommend always tabbing or whatever to have it just fill up for you. Then go back and change it to what you want to change it to. All right? Now, a couple things about this. First of all, after the title, hopefully what I'm about to say, just, this is like, well, duh, but hopefully it makes sense. Anything that you see in this program that's in red, that means that's stuff that's been put in a string. Does that make sense? So if I spell awesome here, so I just write A-W-S-O-M-E, the system, all that means is when it prints out on the screen, it won't be spelled right. But it doesn't matter at all to the system. On the other hand, if I'm putting this in and I spell action wrong, it's not going to work. All right? And you're going to get different messages. In fact, I would encourage you that after you get all this to work, go back, make a copy of it, and start making mistakes in it purposely. That's how you learn. All right? I just go back. I remember this when I went and when I was going for my degree, my 2-year degree. I already had a 4-year degree. I went back for a 2-year degree. First program I had in a COBOL class. I say COBOL, no, most people don't know what the heck you're talking about. But I ran the program, and I had like 30 errors in it. The guy next to me keyed his in, had no errors. Wow, this is cool. This isn't a hard language, and went home. Literally. Well, it took a long time to go through those errors, but I remember what the instructor said, start at the top, because if you fix errors at the top, it may fix stuff at the bottom. It took me 15 minutes to a half an hour, but I had a lot better understanding. When we had the next assignment, we both had about 30 errors on our problem. The problem is, since he hadn't looked at it, he had no idea where to even start. All right? So all I'm telling you is it helped me getting those errors. So then I started making errors on purpose just to see the different kind of errors I could get. Now, if you're going to do that, that's a good way to learn, but get your project done first and then make a copy of it. Don't work with the original. I'm going to put some errors in here now to see what will happen. It'll work, but I have no sympathy for you. I still do it. But if you do that and you screw up your project, I don't have any sympathy for you. All right. So that's, like I said, that's basically what he talks about on here. And you can have an error that's later in the code that if you screw something up, it can end up, you can have an error up here and one down here. And sometimes you look at the one here, the higher up area, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. But when you fix the lower one, sometimes it does fix the upper one. So what I'm saying is, you should always work your way down, but sometimes you get to a certain point where, no, in order to fix an error up above, I've got to fix an error down below. All right? And you may or may not like it, but when you're working with this stuff, I mean, one thing that drives me nuts is I go and I run the program. I get an error message, all right, for whatever reason. I try doing something in a program. The program blows up. Then typically what happens over here is I get a different screen that comes up that tries to show me where the program blew up. It's kind of like a stack trace, all right, and I don't like that. So I have to remember when that happens, you know, nothing is showing here now, but what I'm saying is normally what you see on the left-hand side is that, right here, okay? But if you've got a problem and your program blows up, you get a different thing. One of these comes up. I don't remember which one, but one of those comes up. And if that drives you nuts, just click the first one and it'll come back again, all right? Because all sorts of weird stuff happens. And again, since we're working with an IDE in a language we're not real familiar with, it's going to take some time until you get familiar with it. All right? And, you know, I think Travis would attest to this too, all kidding aside. You never probably totally get familiar with it because you're so used to doing things in a Microsoft way. All right? And sometimes it's done the same way here, but more often than not, it's not. So, if you haven't seen this already, this is page 35 in the handout. But what the author mentions here, and these are just important things for you to realize, all right? And it says how, you know, under this errors and warnings that's at the top of the page. Errors are in red, warnings are in yellow, all right? So, because I've been asked this question already, what if I turn in a program to you and it runs and it's correct and it has no errors but it has warnings? And typically my response is, did you try to fix those warnings? It depends on the person. Sometimes they'll just look down at their shoes and, no, not really. All right. Well, sometimes a warning is an error in weight. Does that make sense? All right, if you don't fix it. Okay, you saw some of the things that I had when I was running that older version of Swift, that I had to do things differently than you did them. So they mention here that errors are going to be shown in red and warnings are going to be shown in yellow. All right. Now he goes through this, and I don't want to read to you. I don't want to do any of that stuff to you. But when you look in here, the key thing is they talk about what an app is. Essentially, it's a series of objects, but it's this right here. Because this isn't new. It says, in iOS, apps are event-driven. So are Android apps. So are virtually any kind of app you've ever created. Be it in C#, be it in Java, you know, it doesn't matter. PHP, you're clicking a button. You're waiting for something to happen. And based on you doing that, hopefully at least, something will happen. But it's important to realize, as it says, typically. So if I run that app with the Hello World thing that we just created, and I never click that button, it'll be happy as hell to sit there forever and not do anything. In just the same way, after I do click the button, and it gives me my message, and it says you've created your first app, or whatever the heck it was, if I don't click the OK button to close it, the program is just sitting there waiting for you to do something. And that's what it says, is really over 99.9% of the time, the program is just cycling there waiting for some kind of a user interaction. There are other interactions that can take place also, such as, well, I could set up a timer that maybe every 20 seconds I ask the user for information, or I automatically saved, or I did something. All right? And they show you here on page 36, the author tries to show you this pictorially as far as what's happening when you're working on it. But I think, we've gotten to the point that hopefully it makes sense. What is different in here are the different routines, etc., that basically are running, because it's always different depending on the language that you're using. All right? What the author is showing you, this is actually a really good picture, because what he's trying to do here is he's trying to describe for you exactly what's happening when you run this app. All right? Step one, you touch the screen. All right? UI kit. You may or may not realize it, but UI kit is basically the thing that gets imported into every one of these single view apps, and it allows you to put anything GUI in your application. All right? So it says it generates that touch event. Well, we already looked a little bit at that touch up inside. That's what they're getting to in here. All right? And it says, oh, well, touch up inside has got associated with it our own function that we wrote that's called show alert. So what that says is, as it says, it sends show alert a message that says run. Do whatever it is you're supposed to do. All right? But notice what they mentioned in here is the view controller is kind of the coordinator of everything that's going on. That's why we're putting all of our code inside of the viewcontroller.swift file. What you'll notice, not this semester, but next semester when we build a little bit more complex apps, and you've seen these kind of things before where maybe you've got a beginning screen and maybe you're going to play a game. Okay, so your first screen has, welcome to this game. And it might have two buttons on it, and it says beginner or advanced. Make sense? Type of an idea. And depending on which of those buttons you press, it takes you to one screen or another screen. Each one of those screens will have their own viewcontroller.swift file. They typically won't all be called. You can't have multiple files by the same name, but you'll see that as we go on in here. So you'll create another thing, and sometimes too you'll create a file that will extend viewcontroller.swift. All right? So what he says in here is, okay, you press this, all the magic happens, it shows you the alert, you're done, and it waits until you click the OK button to tell it to stop. And you know as well as I do, if you had nothing better to do and you really, for whatever reason, this really excited you, you could keep pressing the button and then pressing OK and pressing the button and pressing OK, and it would work just fine. All right? And the author doesn't exactly say this here, but on the bottom of the page, in English, what the author is saying is it pretty much works like this in any programming language. All right? All right. So we've gotten to the point where we've written the first app, the real simple thing, and we've actually put some stuff in it that we're going to be able to keep using. So the author says next, let's start looking at this to-do list. And that was something he did much earlier. All right? He says you don't have to do this in any particular order, although some things make sense to do before others. For example, you cannot read the position of the slider if you have not created a slider. Well, that makes sense. Excuse me. But if this is what we're creating, if this is going to be our GUI right here, and in the first iteration, the first go-around of this, this is what we're creating. So start to think about what we're going to have here. All right? This, where it says, that's basically a label, right? That should make sense. This will be a slider. This is a button. That's a label. That's a label. That's a label. That's a label. That's a button. That's also a button. That's a specialized button that we'll create later, but the idea is that's an information button. So if you wanted to write some kind, maybe the rules or something like that we've talked about with other apps, you could set it up so when you click that button, it would bring something up. All right? But the point is, there really isn't anything that's in here that should surprise you. Okay? We've actually dealt with virtually everything in here, and that we haven't dealt with a slider yet, but we've dealt with labels, we've dealt with buttons, etc. So we've done all that. So the only thing is, what we're doing now is rather than writing something where we generate a random number. It makes sense to use a slider for something like this. Imagine that instead of this, what we were doing is we were playing a game of guess today's temperature type of an idea, because that's kind of what this is. But what it's doing is it's generating a random temperature, or in this case, a random number, and it's asking you to guess it. All right? We could probably do something like this and just use the equivalent of a text box, but it wouldn't be very graphical, and it really would look ugly. It would look kind of dumb, for lack of better words. So by using a slider with this, it makes a lot more sense. Because if the idea is, let's assume that right here, this is around 33, all right, about a third of the way through, okay? So we want to, let's say that's the magical number that was generated. I guess it's 25, try it again, 25. So I put it about a quarter of the way, okay, then I click hit me, okay? So the idea as far as what's happening in here should make sense. So what they do in the next part of the book here is they have you build this. They don't care about aesthetics right now. They don't care how pretty it looks. You can always move stuff around, etc. later. That doesn't matter. Again, I mentioned this to you before. Later, we'll make this look like a real target. We'll make the background look as though it's kind of like a wood paneling type of background, etc. So it'll look a lot nicer. But we don't care about that right now. What we care about is just building an interface that looks good enough, but putting the code in there so that the interface works. Go back to something I've said to you many times, and that is, don't let yourself get consumed by the interface and just keep tweaking it, tweaking it, tweaking it, and then not writing any code. All right? So the author says afterwards, he goes, wait a minute, this doesn't look nearly as nice as what we looked at before because, again, it says the difference is it says these are standard UI kit controls. This is what you get right out of the box. So it'll look pretty generic. And if you say, I don't get it, yes, you do. Because it's a lot like the first time you ever built an HTML page and you didn't put any CSS in it. All right? And so the first time you built it, it looked, it was okay, etc. But then when you put some CSS, oh, now I see it, type of an idea. So that's what we're going to be moving towards. All right? It says you've probably seen this look before because it's perfectly suitable for regular apps, but it's a little boring for a game. So on the bottom of the page here, the author talks about UI kits and other frameworks on the bottom of the page. Again, I don't want to read to you, but it says that there's a lot of different things that you can do right out of the box. You can change it. You can do it in different ways, etc. This is all in the idea. That's why, it may or may not seem like it, but I always try to make some kind of a method to my madness. For instance, those of you who are in, and that's most of you in here, I know not all of you, but those of you who are in the Bootstrap class this semester, the reason that I asked you to create a requirements document wasn't to blow it off and just say, well, you got a simple assignment here where you write a page. No, was to start thinking about how you were going to set things up. All right? And then with the next part that was due, now you're starting to build it. I'm not that concerned with the CSS. I'm not that concerned with it looking pretty, but it should be functional. That's the order in which you should do things. But like I said, so many of you, and it happens all the time. I don't know how to make people stop thinking this way. But so many people think that, well, all that matters is I've got to have a really good looking interface. Which is fine, but if what it does, what's behind that interface, the code, the implementation doesn't work, what have you done? Basically, you've done nothing. All right. So they talk about portrait versus landscape then, as we move here on to page 38. And the author mentions, typically, if you're going to play a game, you play it in landscape mode. You don't have to, but quite often, that's what you see. Okay? And going along with that, turning to the next page here, what's happening over time? Well, take a look. As we've gone up, what's happened? Look at those screen dimensions. Getting bigger and bigger. That's right. You know, the joke is, I saw a cartoon about this. You know, the guy, the geek with a pocket protector, they now have a pocket that's about this big. All right, and it's about that deep, so they can actually put their iPad or their tablet in their pocket.
Don't laugh at me. I do.
Well, but I'm just saying, because that's what people want. All right, and people, so many people that I know, and I don't know about you guys personally, but I know it with my kids. I think that if they had to live without their phone, I can't think of anything that would be worse for them, literally. And my daughter yesterday, she comes home from work and she's making dinner. It's like about, I don't know what it was, 8:30 at night, and her phone kept ringing. For whatever reason, she refused to grab her phone and bring it over by her. It was over on the table where she had to walk to the other side of the room, and it would ring. Ugh! And she kept doing, but she couldn't just let. I said, why don't you just let it go to the voicemail? Oh, I can't do that.
God forbid.
Yeah. Well, going along with that, not only do we need that, as you said, we want it bigger and bigger. All right. Have you seen they're trying to repackage the Surface? Have you seen those new commercials? And basically what they're doing is they're basically just turning it back and forth, keyboard and non-keyboard. So use it as a computer or use it as basically a whatever you want to call that. A tablet, whatever you want to call it. So again, they mentioned in the early days, you only had to worry about one screen size. All right. But then as time went on, it got worse and worse, for lack of better words. Now, the good news for this is when you start working with this stuff, and you know this already, that you can search for, you can basically set it up for different types of devices. All right, and you've got all that stuff automatically loaded for you. And it's even easier than that. I don't want to show you this stuff right now, because if I show you too much of the stuff for next semester, you're going to be concentrating on that stuff that really in the end isn't very important. But there are things that when you're working in your program, you basically can set it up so that the screen size is going to look all the time. All right, it's always going to look like it's maybe an iPhone 4 or an iPhone 5 or whatever. And I'm not talking about choosing a simulator. I'm talking about literally setting it up on your screen that way. All right, we'll go into all that stuff next semester. All right. Oops. So the author says, converting the app to landscape. Okay, so he says, let's go to the attributes inspector for the view controller. Okay, well, it says to rotate the view controller to landscape, it says you're looking for the orientation setting here that's set to simulated metrics. That's over here. So let's go back and take a look at that. All right, so I want to be over here. I don't need this anymore. You know, it's funny. I watch people, and I'm sure it'll happen with some of you next semester, that what happens is it doesn't take very long, and I get really frustrated because I'm used to clicking button X, but for whatever reason I click button Y. That's why it's nice to have John there, and he goes, no, I think you meant to click that one. I did, but I just didn't do it that way. But I watch some of you, and you catch on faster than I do as far as how to work your way around the system. But I'm still constantly, why did I do that? All right, but I still do it. All right. So the author says, you know, in your view controller up here, okay, and I want to follow his instructions because I'm sure I'm going to screw it up otherwise. So. All right, page 40, converting the app to landscape, okay? It says to convert from portrait to landscape, you have to do two things. Make the view in main.storyboard landscape instead of portrait. Change the supported device orientation settings on the app. So first they say open the main storyboard, click on the view controller to select it. And there's a reason that I wanted to mention that, and that's, again, on this right here. So when I click on this, and I think Luke was the one who asked this, but somebody asked this last time, and I just want to make sure you get it. Come on. All right. This thing right here, this view controller scene, if you've got a really complex interface right here, the easiest way to move from one control to another control is to use this. You say, well, I can just click on it. Yeah, but the thing is, when you click on it, quite often what happens is, whether you realize it or not, you accidentally move it a little bit. Then I got to move it back, and you're constantly tweaking it like that. But if you use this is the fastest way, by using this view controller scene to iterate your way around anything. I know the thing that we got asked last time was, I mentioned that, you know, we remember we clicked, held down on the touchpad, and then held down on the control, and we dragged, and I said to drag over to here. And I believe Luke was the one who mentioned, well, couldn't we also drag up to over there? And yeah, they both work the same way. So there's always a lot of different ways that you can do the same thing. And as mentioned, if you look on the screen right now, on the very bottom of the page, way down here, there's this thing. All right, you should see it on your screen also. But notice what happens when I click on it. Okay, and then if I click on it again, it moved over to the left. Well, why might I want to do that? All right, sometimes what you want is maybe I want half of the screen. I need 50% of it for my interface, and I need 50% of it for my code. All right? And this is just taking up room, and I know I'm not going to use it. So you now know how to turn it off, and then when it goes over to here, how to turn it back on again. All right? You never have to have it up there. Plus, you can put your mouse there. You saw that with mine, but you can drag it over, and you can make it about as narrow as you want to make it also. All right? Okay. So then with that highlighted, the view controller up here, the author says go to the attributes inspector, which is at the other end of the Xcode window, and to the inspector pane rather, and activate the attributes inspector. So you look over here and you say, well, what do we have? File inspector, quick help inspector, identity inspector, attributes inspector. All right, so it's the fourth one over. All right. What you're going to need to do, and what I'm just going to do probably, either the last period of class, I hope we get as much of this done as we can get done. In an ideal world, by the end of next week, we'd be done with this. I'm not saying it'll happen, but in an ideal world, that's what would happen. The reason I'd like to be there is you're going to learn a lot if you come in here that last week and just play with this. All right? And just move stuff around, do different things, click a different button here and there. If you're working with a copy, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're basically going to lock up the system. Big deal. Right? All right, so I click the attributes inspector. So my screen now looks at least somewhat like the screen that you see on page 41. Does everybody know that when you start doing this, when you grab on your touchpad, that you can drag down and you can drag up? I mean, it's simple things, but if I forget to say them, sometimes people, oh, I didn't know that. And I don't ever mean to not tell you something. But again, the only way that you'll get comfortable with it is to start playing with it and start using it. They mention on page 41 here, it says, if you haven't already played with this part of the interface builder, the interface or the inspector area shows those various, yeah, fine. It says to rotate the view controller to landscape, you're looking for the orientation setting in simulated metrics. All right, I don't even see simulated metrics, but let's see if it's in here. I know that's correct. Here we go. All right, what I did accidentally, but I clicked up here on the view controller scene. Can't click on the view controller scene. You've got to click where it says view controller. And then you can see it over here. Now notice under the orientation, it says inferred. All right, which means that if you're holding your machine this way, the orientation's portrait, and if you're holding it that way, the orientation's landscape. All right, so you're not doing anything special in order to be able to change it. But if you have not already done so, please go over there. We want to look for the orientation, and we want to click this, and we want to choose landscape. What you should notice right away when you do that is this now changed to a landscape orientation. All right, that's what I think the author is trying to show you in this part. So it says this changes the dimensions. It also puts the button in an awkward place. It says move the button back to the center of the view because it's going to look pretty ugly otherwise. So in other words, if I come over here, all right, I want to grab my button, kind of put it back up so it's somewhat in the middle again. Well, there's sort of in the middle. Yep, there it is. Okay? All right, it says that takes care of the view layout. If we run this in the simulator now, it says the screen does not show up as landscape yet, and the button is no longer in the center. But if you rotate the simulator landscape, everything will look as it should. Please turn to page 42, or take a look up on the screen right here. Then we're going to take a break. When you want to go back and forth between landscape and non-landscape in the simulator, all right, one of the things in your simulator, so the program's got to be running, but under this app, when you've got the simulator up, you should see a thing that says hardware on your menu. When you go to hardware, if you click rotate left or rotate right, it should take it, and if it was running in portrait, that should immediately flip it over to landscape. All right, so if you try that right now, okay, if you try that right now, we're going to take a break in just a second. The last thing that they ask you to do, if you'd all take a look up on the screen here, because then we're done with this part of the chapter, is the author says, go back to here, all right, and from over here, bring up what you've got here, okay? Click on BullsEye at the top. We looked at this before. So all I did was I went over here and I opened up my navigation pane. I don't know why my machine does this, but it does occasionally. So open up the navigation pane by clicking out of these four things that are near the top, the fourth one over, and then over here, click on where it says BullsEye. And then down here, yours probably still has portrait as one of the ones checked. Uncheck it. Which means that the only thing that you're supporting in this particular app are landscape left and landscape right. All right? So do that, save what you're working on. It's a little early, but let's take a break now and we'll come back at 5 after. All right? Yes.
Another way to rotate the simulator, command left.
Yes, you're right. In fact, when you look, when you go and start doing that, what you're going to see are the shortcuts right on the menu itself. Yeah. And command for the Mac is like control for a Windows machine.
Well,
Hey Jeff, remember you talking maybe about a month or so ago about a commercial with the guy, he's got his son's trophy,
Yeah.
and he's like, participation.
Yeah.
I finally seen that commercial, I just lost it, I was dying. He's like, champs.
The guy is perfect for that
Oh, it was
role.
great. And they
Yeah.
got a new one too with some soccer mom, and he's like, he's terrible. Maybe you should go and
Oh, is that the one with when the guy says, "Isn't he great?" and the mom goes, "Yeah," and then she goes, "He's not. He's terrible. Maybe he'll become an announcer and he can have his own catchphrase."
That was the same brand, I guess. But yeah, they got a good one
show me where I was in the landscape. Is it from here? Is it from here? The show the landscape?
Well, no, your simulator was in landscape.
No, go slow. Slow it from the beginning where it started, when it was so light.
Well, that was in the simulator.
So, where am I?
Well, it's not running.
Okay, so I have to click this now, right?
Yep.
So now it's
That's
on.
landscape.
I want to change it to picture profile. How do we change it back to
Well, hardware. That's portrait mode. But did you change that setting he told you over here? Yeah.
oh, but they have to go back and change that to what did you do to that?
Well, to get the so you have the
When I get this screen, I have to go to BullsEye.
well on the storyboard.
And get the contact.
It has to be running.
No,
No.
The screen in the middle is showing.
Well, then you have to go to storyboard. Did you double click? Because you opened a separate window. Yeah, you don't want to double click. the left-hand pane. You're in the storyboard now. Go to view control. Yeah. There's your code. What?
If I wanna have these here, they have to be control.
Then
But the
you
code
open,
is here.
then
So
you
I
open
can see
the
it.
assistant editor.
Huh?
Then you open the assistant editor.
Ouch.